Everyone treats the questions of the final judgment as a mystery, a sealed envelope opened only when the soul stands before the throne. The mystery is the cover story. Jesus already told you what he will ask. He told it plainly, and the only thing that was ever hidden is that nobody bothered to lay the 7 questions side by side on a single page. They are not buried in apocalyptic code. They are sitting in the parables you have heard since you were a child, in 3 sermons, in 2 answers given to men who asked him directly what they had to do. And the reason they feel like a riddle is that they were never collected. Before this is finished, you will know the exact passage behind each of the 7. You will understand why the Church Fathers, Augustine in his commentary on Matthew, Aquinas in the Summa, the diary of Sister Faustina dated February 4, 1935, described the judgment not as an interrogation, but as a mirror. And you will walk away with one specific thing you can do on an ordinary Tuesday that begins writing the answers now. Because that is the part nobody says out loud. The answers to these 7 questions are not given in the moment they are asked. They are constructed slowly by every choice that precedes the asking. If this is the kind of theology you came looking for, the version that names the source, opens the passage, and refuses to soften what is inside it, stay with what is being built here and keep coming back, because the rest of these 7 are going to land harder than the first. There is someone hearing this right now who has been quietly afraid of the judgment for years, not afraid of hell in the abstract, afraid of the specific question that will name the specific thing they already know they did or did not do. That fear is not your enemy. That fear is the first honest answer. Augustine wrote one line that the 7 questions all return to, that God does not discover anything about us in the judgment. He reveals what we already were. The throne is not a courtroom in the way you imagine. It is a room where the lights finally come on. And the first of the 7, the one Jesus told 3 different times in 3 different settings to people who thought they had nothing to account for, is about something every soul was handed at birth. Something most people spend their entire lives mistaking for something smaller than it is. The servant who buried it was not cruel. He was careful. And that is what made the master answer the way he did. A talent in the parable was not a coin. It was roughly 20 years of a laborer's wages handed to one man in a single moment. A weight of silver so heavy 3 servants could not have lifted them between them without strain. That is the first thing nobody tells you about the story you think you understand. Jesus did not choose that detail by accident. He chose it because the question he was building toward had to crush every assumption that the gift in your hands is small. What you were given is not your job. It is not your income. It is not the platform you were never handed or the body you wish were different. It is the specific configuration of capacity, attention, time, and tenderness that exists in no other soul in human history, and the master in the parable already knows the exact amount before he leaves. Aquinas, writing on this passage in the Summa, second part of the second part, question 81, underlined one word the English translations bury. The talents were given according to the proper capacity of each. Not equally. According to capacity. Which means the question is not whether your gift was as large as someone else's. The question is whether the gift you actually received is in the ground or in motion. And here is where the parable turns on you.
The 3rd servant was not corrupt. He did not steal the talent. He did not spend it on himself. He wrapped it in cloth and buried it in cold earth and returned it intact. And that is precisely what the master refused. The servant was careful. He was afraid. He told the truth about being afraid, and the master called him wicked anyway. Aquinas explained the reason in one sentence. The sin was not malice, it was the refusal to risk what had been entrusted. The fear of losing the gift became the way the gift was lost. There is someone listening right now who has been telling themselves for 15 years, maybe 20, that the reason they have not done the thing they were given to do is that the timing is wrong. The family is not ready. The wound is not healed. The door has not opened. The parable does not ask why the talent was buried. It only asks where it is now. And the question that follows you out of Matthew 25 is not whether you wasted what you were given. It is whether you used it. The two are not the same, and the distance between them is exactly the distance between the two servants who heard, "Well done," and the one who heard the silence before the verdict. The first question is not about scale. It is about whether the silver in your hand ever left your hand, which forces the second question into the open. Because once you understand what was buried, you start to notice who was standing at your gate the whole time you were burying it. The rich man in Luke 16 is never accused of a single act of cruelty. Read the passage line by line and look for the violence. It is not there. He does not kick Lazarus. He does not order him removed. He does not laugh at the sores or curse the dogs that come to lick them. He simply walks past the gate every day in his fine linen, the smell of roasted meat trailing behind him, and the man covered in ulcers lying 10 paces from his door never enters his field of vision. That is the entire indictment.
And that is what makes the second question the most quietly terrifying of the 7, because it is not asking whether you were generous. It is asking whether you saw. John Chrysostom preached on this parable at least 3 separate times in Antioch in the late 4th century, and in each of those homilies he returned to one sentence so blunt the congregation recorded it. It is not for taking the poor man's goods that the rich are punished, but for not sharing their own, and before that, for not seeing him at all. He repeated it because he knew his listeners would hear greed and exhale. The sin in the parable is older than greed. It is the slow daily training of the eye to glide over a particular kind of human being until that person becomes part of the architecture. The gate is the detail Jesus chose on purpose. Lazarus is not in a distant country. He is not behind a wall. He is at the threshold the rich man crosses morning and evening, close enough to hear the silver hit the table inside. The proximity is the verdict. There is someone listening right now who can name the person at their gate without thinking. The mother who has not been called in 7 months. The neighbor whose lights stay on too late. The coworker who eats lunch alone every day at the same table. The brother whose last message is still unread on a Tuesday in October. You did not refuse them. You did not insult them. You simply organized your week around not noticing they were there. The question in Luke 16 does not ask what you gave. It asks who you walked past. And Chrysostom's sentence cuts deeper than almsgiving because he understood the order. The not sharing comes second. The not seeing comes first. And you cannot give what you have trained yourself for a decade not to perceive. The rich man's torment in the parable is not that he is poor now.
It is that he can finally see Lazarus clearly across a chasm that exists because he refused to see him across a doorway.
The eyes that would not focus in life are forced open in death, and the distance between the two men is the exact distance the rich man maintained while he was alive. Which means the second question is not answered by writing a check tomorrow. It is answered by the name you let yourself say out loud when you finally admit you have been pretending not to know it was there. And that is the bridge into the third question. Because once the eye opens to who has been lying at your gate, Jesus does something in Matthew 25 that no other passage in the Gospel does. He stops speaking in parables. He describes the throne directly, and he names in his own voice exactly who he was the whole time you were walking past. Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46, is the only passage in the entire Gospel where Jesus drops the parable form and describes the final judgment as a scene he is watching unfold. No, the kingdom of heaven is like. No, there was a certain man. Just the throne, the nations gathered, the separation, and a criterion stated in his own voice with no metaphor wrapped around it. That fact alone should stop anyone who has read it casually for 30 years. Because if Jesus chose to step out of parable for exactly one passage in his entire teaching ministry, the criterion he names there is not one criterion among many. It is the one he refused to leave to interpretation. And the criterion is this: I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was a stranger, I was naked, I was sick, I was in prison, and what did you do? Augustine, preaching on this passage in Sermon 86 to his congregation in Hippo, said one thing that pastors have been quoting for 16 centuries without fully feeling: that Matthew 25 is the most practical theology that exists, because it leaves nowhere for the soul to hide behind doctrine it never enacted. He called it the passage that judges the judges. You can recite the creed perfectly. You can know every counsel. You can have catechized your children for 2 decades. And the king in the scene asks one question, and the question is not what you believed. The question is what you did when somebody was cold. There is someone listening right now who has been waiting for a great spiritual moment, a vocation, a revelation, a sign that the supernatural is real and addressed to them by name. The man at the bus stop with no jacket in November is the sign. The cousin in the psychiatric ward whose number you have not dialed in 14 months is the sign. The new neighbor who has not unpacked because nobody asked if she needed help is the sign. The throne is not waiting until the end to address you. It is addressing you through a face you have already met this week, which is the part of the passage that breaks people open when they actually read it. Both groups, the sheep and the goats, give the same answer: Lord, when did we see you? Neither side recognized him in the moment. The righteous were not righteous because they saw through the disguise. They were righteous because they fed the hungry man without needing to know he was a king. The condemned were not condemned because they refused a king. They were condemned because the disguise worked on them. The hungry man looked only like a hungry man, and that was enough reason to walk on. I did not know it was you is not an excuse in the passage. It is the verdict. The whole architecture of the encounter with God in another human being depends on the fact that you cannot see him clearly until after you have already chosen. The recognition comes on the other side of the act, which means the third question
is the one that exposes how thin the line is between the two groups. Not theology, not piety, not even intention. Just whether the bread left the hand.
And once that question is sitting in front of the soul, the next two cannot be separated from it, because Jesus tied them together in the prayer he gave with his own mouth, and he tied them in a way most people repeat every Sunday without hearing what they just promised. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. 6.5 billion people on this planet have said that line, many of them every single day for 40, 50, 60 years, and almost none of them have heard what they were promising. The word "as" is not poetry. It is a hinge. Jesus did not say, "Forgive us and also help us forgive." He bound the two clauses together with a conditional so sharp that immediately after teaching the prayer, in Matthew 6, verse 14, he stopped and explained it again, in case anyone tried to soften it. If you forgive others, your heavenly Father will forgive you. If you do not, neither will he. He has never repeated any other line of the Our Father in commentary. He repeated that one. Aquinas in the Summa, second part of the second part, question 83, article 16, treated this not as two petitions, but as a single mechanism, one movement of the soul that turns in two directions at once. The soul that releases is the same soul that receives. The soul that grips is the same soul that cannot be filled. He used the image of a hand. A fist cannot hold water. You cannot keep your fingers closed around the throat of the person who wronged you and hold them open to receive mercy at the same time. The geometry of the soul does not permit it, which is why the fourth and the fifth questions are not asked separately at the throne. They are asked as one. Did you forgive? And did you ask to be forgiven? And were those two motions in your life the same motion? There is a specific kind of soul this passage is hunting.
The soul that goes to confession on Saturday, recites the act of contrition with real tears, walks out lighter, and on Sunday morning, sitting in the pew, sees the sister-in-law who said the thing at the funeral 7 years ago, and feels the old stone settle back into the chest exactly where it was. That soul is not pretending. That soul genuinely wants God's forgiveness. And that soul, according to the mechanism Aquinas described, is asking God to do for it precisely what it has refused to do for another human being. And Jesus said in his own voice that the request lands the way the refusal was given. The measure you use will be measured back to you. There is someone listening right now who has been carrying one name for 19 years. You know the syllables. You know what they did. You have told the story to maybe 3 people in your whole life, and each time something hot moved up the back of your neck while you spoke. You have prayed for the strength to forgive them and meant it. And every time you reach the line, "As we forgive those who trespass against us," you skim over it because you know in some quiet part of yourself that you are not yet doing what you are promising God you are doing. The fourth and fifth questions are not about whether you reached the destination. They are about whether the movement of release in your life pointed the same direction as the movement of asking. And the soul that asks God for mercy while withholding it from another is not a hypocrite in the cartoon sense. It is a soul that has not yet understood that the door it is knocking on opens only from the inside,
by the hand that is also opening another door for someone else. Which raises the next question Jesus asked in 3 separate places against 3 different cities against one specific servant. Because once you know the mechanism, knowing becomes its own weight. And Jesus had something very precise to say about what he does with a soul that knew.
Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! If the miracles done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. Jesus said this in Matthew 11, verses 21 through 24, and the line nobody quotes is the one he attached at the end, that it will be more tolerable on the day of judgment for Sodom than for Capernaum. Sodom, the city the ancient world used as shorthand for the worst of human depravity. And Jesus said Capernaum, the quiet fishing town where he preached, where he healed Peter's mother-in-law, where he performed the cure of the centurion's servant, would face a harder accounting. Not because Capernaum was more wicked, because Capernaum saw more and did less with what it saw. That is the 6th question, and it has a temperature that the previous 5 do not. Luke 12, verse 47, drops the gavel even harder. The servant who knew his master's will and did not do it will receive a severe beating. The servant who did not know and acted wrongly will receive a light one. Jesus stated the principle out loud, in his own voice, with no parable wrapping. From everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required. Aquinas, treating this in the Summa, second part of the second part, question 186, made the point so cleanly it should be read every Lent, that ignorance excuses the will only to the extent the ignorance is involuntary. The moment you know, the meter starts running. And you know. There is someone listening right now who is carrying a very particular kind of weight, the weight of having heard the truth so many times that they can quote it without flinching, recite the catechism, name the 7 sacraments, distinguish venial from mortal, and yet have arranged their week so that none of what they know touches what they actually do on Wednesday afternoon at 2:15. You are not a stranger to the gospel. You are a citizen of Capernaum. The Sermon on the Mount has been read at you, the parables explained to you, the Eucharist offered to you. And Jesus is not asking how much you absorbed. He is asking what changed because you absorbed it, which is the cruelty and the mercy of the 6th question at the same time. Cruelty because the bar rises every time you click on something like this and listen all the way through. And mercy because the rising bar is itself the proof that he is still treating you as someone capable of more. The fig tree in Luke 13 was given 1 more year because the gardener pleaded for it. 1 more year of being dug around and fertilized. 1 more year of being given exactly what it needed to bear fruit. The mercy was the extension. The judgment was that at the end of the extension, the fruit had to be there. And the part of this question that lands hardest on a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon is that nobody can answer it for you. Not your pastor, not your spouse, not the saint whose name you took at confirmation. You know what you have been given. You know what you have done with it. And the gap between those two is the only data the 6th question requires, which is exactly the gap the 7th and final question was designed to close. Because Jesus described one group of people standing at the door at the end, holding every credential the kingdom of God could issue, and he said something to them that no Christian on earth should be able to read without feeling the floor tilt. Not everyone who says to me, "Lord, Lord,"
will enter the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 7, verse 21. And then the sentences that should make every committed believer on this planet stop and reread 3 times. On that day many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name do many mighty works? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Read it slowly. These are not pagans.
These are not lukewarm pew sitters. These are people whose resumes in the kingdom of God look better than yours and mine combined. They prophesied. They cast out demons. They performed miracles. The supernatural moved through their hands, and they have witnesses to prove it. And Jesus looked at them and used the most devastating verb in the Greek New Testament, uk egnon. I never knew you. Not, I knew you once and then you fell away. Never. Augustine, working through this passage in his treatise on the Sermon on the Mount, Book 2, Chapter 25, wrote one sentence that has been quoted in every serious commentary since the 5th century. It is one thing to know about Christ, and another thing entirely to be known by him. The Latin word he used for the second kind of knowing was cognoscere, the same word used in Genesis for the intimacy between husband and wife. The kind of knowing that is not data, the kind of knowing that is presence, the kind of knowing where 2 persons have stood inside the same silence enough times that the silence itself is now the relationship. That is what these people did not have. They had information. They had power. They had a public reputation. They did not have him. There is someone listening right now who has been doing the work for years. The parish committee, the rosary every morning, the Bible study on Thursdays, the children dragged through every sacrament on schedule, the donations recorded in the ledger. And in some private hour you have never told anyone about, you have admitted to yourself that you do not actually know if you know him, or if you know about him and have built a very effective life around the knowing about. That admission is not the failure. That admission is the beginning of the only thing that answers the 7th question. Because the difference between the 2 kinds of knowing is the spine that holds the other 6 together. The talent gets used because the master is a face, not a concept. The man at the gate gets seen because mercy has been received from a person, not learned from a catechism. The hungry are fed because someone has been hungry with you. The withheld forgiveness collapses because the one who forgave you is not an idea in your head, but a presence in your chest. The truth you were given becomes action because the one who gave it is the one you would not betray for anything. All 7 questions are one question wearing 7 different faces, and the face under all of them is this. When he looked at you across the ordinary hours of your ordinary life, the dishwater, the commute, the long minutes before sleep, was there someone there to look back? Not someone reciting, someone who knew him. Because in the end, the throne is not deciding whether you earned entry. It is recognizing whether the one on the throne is recognizable to you, and whether you are recognizable to him, because the 2 of you have been together long enough that recognition is no longer in question. I told you at the start you would know the exact passage behind each of the 7, and now you do. The talents in Matthew 25, the man at the gate in Luke 16, the king in disguise in Matthew 25 again,
the hinge of the Our Father in Matthew 6, the cities that saw and did not move in Matthew 11, the workers of lawlessness in Matthew 7.
I told you Augustine, Aquinas, and Sister Faustina would name what the judgment actually is, and they did. Aquinas with the geometry of the closed fist, Augustine with the line that the judgment reveals what we already were, and Faustina sitting on the edge of a narrow convent bed in Poix on February 4, 1935, pressing a pencil into the page of a black notebook after a vision she had refused to describe for 3 days, recording one sentence the Vatican left untouched through every stage of her cause. I understood that mercy is the greatest attribute of God, but mercy too has its limit, which is the moment of death. She underlined the last 6 words. And I promised you one specific thing for tomorrow. Here it is. Choose one of the 7 before this day ends and answer it with one motion. Not all 7. One. There is someone hearing this who has been living for years as if none of this applied, and the 7 questions have just landed on a chest that is not braced for anything in a long time. And the fear in your throat is not condemnation. It is the gardener still digging. There is another listening who has been quietly confident. The mass attendance, the basic decency, the absence of scandal, and is now suspicious that being unobjectionable was never the same as being known. There is a third who is convinced they have failed all 7 and is one breath away from closing this and not coming back. And to you, the only sentence that matters is this. The only soul Jesus refused was the one that thought it had no account to render. And you are not that soul, because you are still listening. Tomorrow, before noon, do the one thing the one question opened in you. Pick up the phone and dial the name. Walk to the address where the talent has been buried and start digging. Sit 10 minutes in front of the tabernacle and say nothing, so the 7th question stops being theoretical. Let us pray. Lord, you did not hide from us what you would ask. You wrote it into the parables we learned as children, and into the prayer we say without listening. We confess we have buried what you gave, walked past faces you were wearing, asked for mercy with closed hands, recited your name without knowing you. Thank you that the fig tree is still being tended, that Sister Faustina's sentence still has the word until inside it, that today is not yet the moment her vision named. Give us the courage to answer one question today instead of 7 on the last day. Let us be known by you before we are recognized by you. Lord, do not let me arrive a stranger. Tell me in the comments which question, 1 to 7, landed the heaviest. And the next time we open the diary, we go to the entry Sister Faustina wrote on September 13, 1935, the day she described what happens to the soul in the first 60 seconds after death, and the one detail she insisted on writing twice in 2 different inks because she was afraid no one would believe it the first time.